everyone. Hello, everyone. How are you? This is Kathy Barnett. I'm so excited to have each and every one of you out here. So you guys asked for it, and so we delivered. We are bringing Dr. Anita Amos back live here with us at our virtual BYOB. So this is part two, talking with Dr. Anita Amos about COVID-19. What else? What else is anyone talking about? It's all about COVID, right? But you guys had a lot of questions, and the last time Dr. Anita was here, and the questions continued to come in at our questions at kathybarnettforcongress.com. And so we wanted to bring her back so that we can just kind of do some rapid fire question and answer and see if we can get more information, because I truly believe that our greatest enemy right now is ambiguity. One of our greatest enemies is the fact that information is available, but sometimes it's hard to decipher what is real, what is not. So listen, before I bring Dr. Anita on, let me just give you guys some house tips. Please share this broadcast. There's a share button probably down at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now. Make sure you share this. Also, you have the ability to host your own watch party. So press that button as well. It is so very vital, right? One of the reasons why this lockdown sucks in so many regards is because people like myself, who is not an incumbent, we have to find creative ways to get our message out. And I need you guys. I never for a moment thought from the very beginning of this journey that I could do this on my own. I can't. And not only can I not do it, I have no interest in doing it by myself. You guys see how the president is beat up often trying to stand for us. I mean, it's a lonely world out there. I need you guys to come alongside what it is we're doing. So right now, share this on all of your pages and groups, as well as host a watch party. Now, this is a BYOB. Y'all know I don't drink. However, I'm switching it up tonight. I'm not drinking plain water. Let me see. I don't want to endorse anyone, but I'm drinking seltzer water. So this is what I'm drinking. What are you guys drinking? Let us know. With that, let me introduce my good friend, Dr. Anita Amos. Hi, Anita.
Hi.
What are you drinking?
I am drinking some lovely herbal tea.
You're so happy.
And it's wonderful to be back.
It is, right? You were, there was a high demand for us to bring you back. And most people were calling you that lady doctor. And so we just wanted to bring the lady doctor back. You had such good information and it was digestible. And I earnestly believe one of our greatest enemies, not just today, it's being amplified today, but generally throughout life, is a lack of knowledge. And so, or a lack of information, knowing how to process. There's so much information all around us. We can Google information. It's at our fingertips, but it's really hard sometimes to know what is real, what's not.
Right. Yes. Actually, there's a term going around right now. We're in the fog of a pandemic because it's information overload.
It is.
And there are often pieces of information that are at odds with each other, that it's really difficult to kind of sit there and try to read between the lines and figure out what's truth, what's fact here, what is not entirely truthful,
right.
There's a little bit of an agenda behind it. So trying to figure that out and decipher this overload of data it's challenging.
It is, and especially when there's so much on the line now, right? Not just our health, but our livelihood, our economic viability. So much is online. But let me just say, I want to say hi to Dave, Matt, Judy, and Lisa. Welcome, guys. Give us your questions. I have my wonderful helpmate, my hubby, who is here, and he's looking at your questions, and he will make sure that I get those. Let me, guys, tell you a little bit more about Anita in case you were not here for part one, which you can access by going to Kathy Barnett on Facebook, Kathy Barnett for Congress, PA4. But Dr. Anita earned a BA in Biological Sciences at Wellesley College. As an undergraduate student, she worked in an pronounce it for me.
Immunology.
Yes, laboratory at Harvard Medical School and completed graduate level coursework at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Upon graduation, Anita was awarded a prestigious Pre-Doctoral Intramural Research Award from the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., where she worked in the Division of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Following a year of working abroad, teaching science in Japan and Nepal, Anita began her doctoral studies at the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her Ph.D. in Immunological Sciences. Anita served as an adjunct faculty member at multiple universities, teaching courses in biological sciences, prior to co-founding an ed tech startup, Montessori Compass. Anita homeschools her 4 children and enjoys guiding them through hands-on investigations of scientific principles. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a mouthful. And I read all of it because, again, there's information overload. And there are some people we should listen to, and others we should probably just put a pin in it, maybe, and come back to it a little bit later. But Anita is the real deal. In fact, she worked in the department that was headed by none other than Dr. Fauci, right?
Yep.
Know who Dr. Fauci is. So Anita comes highly qualified. So I'm going to get right into it and just start asking you some questions. Want to say hi to Ross, Corona beer. Ross, you're drinking a Corona beer, really? Marcy, Jean, Lisa, guys, thank you so much for being on. So listen, Anita, first question.
Yes.
Now, again, we talked a lot about the rudimentary, the fundamentals of this novel coronavirus in part 1. And I strongly encourage each of you to go to, on Facebook, Kathy Barnett for Congress PA4, to go back to part 1 of what is COVID-19. Where did it come from? How is it transmitted and contracted? We talked about all of those things. So now tonight is part 2. So we're going to move forward, and you can always go back and take a look at those other things. So Anita, with that, I'm gonna just jump right into it. Okay. All over the news, we've had the intelligence community come out saying that that they agree with the overwhelming majority of the scientific community that says COVID-19 was not man-made or genetically modified. Now, there are people who readily align with that. And then there are some of us who are asking the question, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Especially when you have the WHO as well as America not being allowed by China to go into or to have complete access to the Wuhan laboratory. So how exactly did the national intelligence community, as well as the overwhelming majority of the scientific community, come to a conclusion when they don't have access to the laboratory?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And it turns out that it comes down to a couple of studies where they compared the genetic sequence of portions of the virus, this novel SARS-CoV-2 virus, with the known sequence of a SARS-CoV virus.
Okay.
One that we already knew existed, was not novel, already had the sequence too. So now we have this brand new novel virus. No one knows where it came from. So they compared the genetic sequence of those 2 viruses. And what they found was something that can be interpreted in multiple ways, it turns out.
Okay.
So the virus itself has these proteins on the outside. That's part of how it gets its name, coronavirus, that sort of stick out, these little glycoproteins. And they use those proteins to attach to the surface of our host cells, human cells. There's specific proteins on the surfaces of our cells, ACE2, that they actually, the ACE2, it's a specific, but we won't get into it, but it uses the receptor to bind to the surface of our cells, okay?
Mhm.
So here's where it gets interesting. The sequence of the novel virus is extremely adept at binding a human host cell. That's where the key differences are from this other known virus, this original SARS-CoV virus.
Right.
So they looked at that and decided that it couldn't have happened as a man-made, and it actually must be through natural selection, which is kind of an interesting conclusion. So I looked into this further, and it turns out that the specific mutations and differences that are seen in the ability of basically the SARS virus to cling on to a human cell, if you were to put those mutations into a computer model system, it doesn't look like it confers an advantage. That's not the first thing that would jump out to a scientist. You wouldn't look at those mutations and say, that's going to help this virus to cling really well to a human host cell. But it does. So scientists looked at this, and they've concluded that if there was some sort of a nefarious, or not nefarious even, but if there was some sort of a study going on in a lab where you were trying to give an enhanced function to a virus, if you looked at this mutation in a model, it would not jump out to you as that it works. So you would not actually do these particular mutations. Therefore, it wasn't man-made. And that's really, I mean, if you look at the data that's being touted as for why this wasn't man-made, it turns out it's not so obvious. It's an interpretation of the data, but it's certainly not a, shut the case is closed, this was not man-made. It just turns out the virus is too good at attacking human cells that could not have been made. It had to be arrived by natural selection. And natural selection would be simply that it made the jump into a human and it mutated and was able to become pathogenic in a human as a result of being able to infect a human cell. But that's the data. And it is it's not as closed, shut the door that this is, a closed case clear as one might imagine that it would be.
But but the manner in which the National Intelligence Agency, because generally, they made this report when the president, right after the president came out and said, we need to look into how this virus came about and what is China's role in this. The president was talking about the WHO. They should have known about this and all of this. And so I was watching one news report that said, it's so out of character for the intelligence community to come out immediately after the president has said something to contradict him, leading me to believe that they had much more conclusive information that this is, did not happen in a lab. But what you're explaining sounds more, as you said, it's an interpretation, a very, I don't know, kind of a loosey-goosey kind of interpretation. I'm no scientist and I don't play one on TV. I'm just saying, as I'm listening to this, and I did read some of those same studies, I just thought, this doesn't seem as conclusive for the majority of the scientific community to say it is true. And now for the intelligence agencies to come out and back the scientific community up.
Well, it's obviously very possible that the intelligence community has access to a lot more information than we do. So It's hard to say. But in terms of what is accessible to the general population, that's really the evidence. So if you read the articles you can read the headline saying this was not man-made. But if you go to the actual primary research papers, you'll see what that's based on. And it turns out that it really is an interpretation. It's not, like you said, it's not something that is so incredibly conclusive. There's still very much a possibility that the mutations were introduced. It's not, I'm not saying, obviously one way or the other, but it's, it's not ruled out by the information that has been released. We'll say that. Perhaps there's information that we don't know about that is conclusively indicating it wasn't man-made.
Right. And so in summary, the interpretation has been arrived at from the perspective that the novel coronavirus is so good at doing what it does, it couldn't be man-made.
Correct.
I would probably think the opposite, right? But will we ever really know? I mean, especially since China is not giving us access to their laboratory. I find it very difficult for someone to come to a conclusive understanding of how this virus originated.
Right. No, my guess is that we won't ever, I mean, we won't ever really know, but I think that there are a lot of interesting things that would indicate that if it wasn't actually man-made, that there's probably a decent likelihood that it originated from the lab, whether it was just a naturally occurring form of the virus that they were researching. But it's just, I mean, since the very beginning of this, it seemed really strange that there happens to be a bio-level safety 4 lab, you know, the Wuhan Virology Institute right there in Wuhan, one of the only of 2 labs that can study these types of viruses in all of China. And there have been, you know all of this, multiple reports over the years of concerns of the safety protocols that were lacking. So it's kind of a very odd coincidence.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and here's the thing. I think in a healthy society, you have to be able to ask questions. And from the genesis of COVID-19 coming to the forefront in all of our minds, roughly 2 months ago, from that point to now, all of the experts have been wrong on every single aspect of this virus coming up front. The only one who seemed to know anything and early on was President Donald Trump, when he decided to close our borders to China and then to certain parts of Europe immediately, versus waiting for more data. But I mean, and because they've been so wrong, if you remember, the WHO told us, you know, there's no human to human transmission of this virus. We had Dr. Fauci, who came right behind the WHO, acknowledging that to be a fact based on the observations, right? We've had the CDC tell us 2.2 million people are going to die. Then they, you know, and so all these numbers keep changing, and we recognize that this is an evolving kind of observation and understanding. But I believe that because they've gotten it so wrong, you and I, as a public, have every right to question. I mean, it should be almost intuitive that we're questioning versus, you know, acting like sheep and just going along with whatever the new thing is.
Right. No, you know, we've had this discussion. I completely agree. Questioning is, if people aren't questioning things happening right now and headlines they're reading, they really need to be asking themselves why, what has led them to the place that they feel like they can blindly believe everything that's out there. You know, I think about the mask. So
I think one of the first lessons you taught me when you were helping me in my homeschooling science program with my children is that the first task of a scientific study is to ask a question. That's almost one of the first things you do, is to ask a question. What's going on here? What's happening? What happened? How did I get here? It's just a natural thing, right? So it's not a bad thing. Now, let's get to the next one. That, I mean, in all the questions that we were getting from people, this one is perhaps one of the most asked questions, and that is, what is herd immunity? We hear a lot of people talking about it, but what is it exactly?
Right. Herd immunity is the concept that when enough people in a particular population have already developed immunity to a virus, whether because they acquired the virus naturally and then their own body fought it off and developed immunity, or because of the vaccine, when enough people have that, there's just not enough opportunities for that virus to even be transmissible, to get around. And now there's just a safety net for everybody. This is something that we've had in place for a long time for things like measles, for example. And so people who are not able to get the vaccine to measles, either because they're immunosuppressed or in another type of genetic condition, they are protected by the fact that measles just doesn't have an opportunity to spread in the population because everybody's been vaccinated.
Now, I remember back in I don't know if it was the 80s or the 90s, but it was a really big deal that if someone's child got measles, they threw a party where they brought everyone's kid. I know, I think the research is now that that's probably not a good idea to do that, but I remember there was a point in time that they would throw parties, bring other kids so that they could all contract it at the same time. Is that kind of the concept behind herd immunity?
No.
Okay.
No, that's not. No, those would be people. No. So I've heard of that with chickenpox. I had not heard of that with measles. With measles, it's a particularly bad idea because measles just happens to do something really crazy with your immune system where it just wipes out all of your memory cells to pretty much anything you've encountered. It kind of sets you back a big.
Okay.
So
okay.
But in terms of, that would not be, that's just the concept of that a naturally acquired immunity is going to be superior to one that's acquired by vaccine.
Right.
And that is true. It's, however, you have to weigh the risks of going through that infection and having your, not knowing how your body is going to respond to it versus having it introduced by a vaccine. And that's part of it. I mean, we know that some of these things like chickenpox, people weigh the risks of that and they can decide, well, if my child gets it when they're really young, if they're uncomfortable for a while and there are actual risks of anything more serious than a couple of chickenpox scars, isn't that great? Right. So maybe they'll do that. But other viruses like measles, mumps, rubella, that could get much more serious side effects. So you decide on a vaccine. So now we're trying to figure out with this virus, right? What are the risks? If I were faced with a vaccine right now or the option of acquiring this virus naturally, I'd have a lot of questions. And I'm a big vaccine person. Like the whole concept of immunology is your body's ability to develop an immune response. And I believe in vaccines, but for this one, I honestly would have a lot of hesitation at this moment in time as to which one would I prefer, risking the infection or going with the vaccine. And that's for a variety of reasons. One, I just don't have enough information about the infection. We know that 95% of the people who catch this won't even end up in the hospital. You have a mild case, you're going to be okay. A lot of people don't even have symptoms. They have it and don't even really know that they have it. One, I remember we talked about the Diamond Princess cruise last time. And of the 650 people who had the virus, it was about half of them didn't have any symptoms. And they only knew they had it because they were testing every single passenger, right? Well, they had one woman in Arizona. She was in her 70s. And she gave an interview with a reporter. She had was about to go out for a 2-hour bike ride. And she explained that she knew she had the virus because they gave her the test, but her only symptom was a fever of 99 degrees for about, a couple of hours. And that was it. And she was fine. So we're left wondering here, well, what are our actual risks? I would want to know versus taking a vaccine that might, it's Operation Warp Speed is the name of the vaccine development right now. So I don't know if I want a vaccine that was developed at warp speed or so.
Yeah, because and that's another question as well of the validity of taking a vaccine. I think last week, in mid last week, I heard a laboratory saying that they're on the verge of having a vaccine. I'm like, well, that's really quick. Right? 2-month window when we've been told it takes anywhere from 16 to 18 months to develop a vaccine. And now we have laboratories that are coming out saying they're on the cusp of it, right? In a much truncated time frame. I don't know if I would trust, in such a truncated time frame if they came up with a vaccine to actually allow them to inject that in my body versus, more time of study and understanding.
Right. Well, it turns out designing the vaccine is the easy part. Okay. And there were studies underway to try to design vaccines for SARS and MERS. They just never the demand for them dropped before they had finished it. So the hard part is testing for safety and for effectiveness. And that testing for safety part, we don't want that rushed.
Like, we don't want, right. Okay, so designing a vaccine may be quick and easy, right? Because you're just kind of duplicating and adding, from all of our years of knowledge of various types of viruses, and you can look at it and see how it is, designed. But the testing part, right? Like, we want to make sure that before someone injects something into us, that they didn't skip on that part.
Right. Yeah, don't skip that part.
Don't skip that part, and then I become your test dummy. I don't know if I like that option. But now let me ask you, do we need a vaccine before we can open up our nation, specifically our state?
Right. No, I would say we better hope not. Yeah, no, because that could be a while. And really, even with the Operation Warp Speed, trying to test the safety and then the efficacy, is it effective or not? It's going to take a long time. I mean, and to have everything locked down for that long, we keep hearing the phrase, is the cure worse than the disease? And that's a question everyone really needs to be asking, especially if we're thinking that everyone must be vaccinated before we open again. That's no. However, I think targeting the lockdown to those who are most vulnerable is an important thing to be asking and questioning. The concept of differentiating who remains locked down and who doesn't, and are all questions that should be being considered right now. To how to.
And in line with that, I guess even knowing who should be locked down, because it's one thing to know you have diabetes. It's one thing to know you have, heart disease, or if you are of a particular age or whatever else the underlying issue may be. With this virus, COVID-19, it seems as though it exploits weaknesses that may be known, but that it also exploits weaknesses you may not know. So that would be a challenge to understand there are some clear things we know, right? If you know you have these underlying health issues, right, that but there's a strong case to be made for you to continue to monitor yourself accordingly, right? And to monitor your interaction with the larger world. But then there are those who may not know that they have these underlying health issues. And there have been some cases where it's been said that COVID-19 has exploited some of those weaknesses, right? That perhaps they didn't know.
Sure.
So what do we do? Do we continue to remain locked down until we have a vaccine? Or do we recognize that there are risks associated with life?
Right. I think it's a little bit of what you just said, recognizing that there are risks. Those who have a known sort of vulnerability remaining locked down. And then I think there's just a lot of room for more information. We need to know who are the people that are who reliably are being asymptomatic, who are able to encounter this virus and overcome it with so you can kind of decide, what is my risk factor? And like you said, there may be something that's unknown, that hasn't been detected, that they are not looking into. I mentioned to you before, there's a specific enzyme deficiency that can impact how your body processes iron, and that could make you more vulnerable. Do you know if you have it? But the studies haven't been done. So we need more just information on all those closed cases. Over 1 million people now have recovered. Many of those were very mild. What do they have in common? What are the triggers that make somebody have a more severe case? And everybody has to decide, for themselves in terms of their risks, their odds. And like you said, getting up in the morning can be a risk when you have a big dog that likes to lay under your bed.
I know. Apparently we are getting a lot of live questions. I'm going to ask my team to actually put them here in the chat box so that I can see them. Oh, here it is. Alan, thank you. It's Alan. He says, has the hydroxychloroquine treatments been working? This treatment seems to have fallen off the map. Not heard much about it lately. I know 3 cases of people infected that have been treated with this and have recovered. Your thoughts or comments? Thank you, Alan.
Alan, that's an excellent question. I honestly, I have the same question. Or you can Google that and find places where it has worked beautifully. Yeah. And then other places where they say it hasn't worked at all. So what was different between those 2 situations? It seems like some drastically different results coming out when looking at that drug, which is kind of unusual. Usually it would be something that's a little bit more gray and in between. So I have to say, I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, what I do know is that I remember Fox News had a Democrat, not that it mattered, not that it should matter, but she was definitely not one of Trump's biggest fans. She contracted COVID-19, was on her deathbed, and she went on to Fox to give her testimony of having her husband. She heard President Trump mention the success rate, or what seemed to be success. She took it, she recovered within hours, and then she was on Fox News, and she's like, look, all I'm going to say is I heard the president mention it, and I went out and I had very few options. My husband went out, purchased it, I took it, I recovered. And there has been, as Alan said, a couple of cases that we've heard. People say, I took it, I recovered. And you're right. We also have, conflicting sources of information. I don't know if they administered it to someone and it did not work, and that's why they're saying it, or because they're just poo-pooing the. But it really does seem like there's a lot of conflicting information there. Hey, I have another question. Dave is asking, oh, here it is. If this is natural, how is it spreading to extreme hot climates as well as cold climates?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. It seems to be defying some of the patterns of other viruses, but not completely unheard of. It's able to adapt in different environments and thrive in different environments. And that is an interesting question to consider in terms of whether it weighs the scales at all of being man-made unique in the ability for a virus to be able to be transmissible in multiple different types of climates.
Yeah, just leaping off of Dave's question, one of the things the president, but he came on for the very first time, maybe 2 weeks ago, and started talking to us about some of the data or some of the research they now have by analyzing this virus, which I was so excited about, because this was the first time in all of these pressers anyone was coming and talking to us. We have over 800 closed cases with this virus, and this was the first time, maybe 2 weeks ago, of someone actually coming out and talking to us, right, demystifying this virus. Of course, the only thing the mainstream media could talk about was don't inject yourself with disinfectants. But apart from that, there was a lot of good information. And one of the things they said that the virus appears not to do well in sunlight. So is that a reason why those in Africa are not succumbing to this virus as much as some other areas, our area, parts of Europe?
It's possible. It's possible. It is a well-known thing. Many viruses actually are not able to withstand basically being exposed to ultraviolet rays.
Right.
So the idea that a place that has more sunshine would have lower rates of transmission would make sense. There are places that are defying that. There's parts of Brazil where there are high rates of transmission, and they're certainly, one of the more tropical places on the globe. So they have high heat, high humidity, lots of sunshine. Maybe just some it's hard to say. whether that's the reason. It seems like there are a lot of factors that contribute to the transmission of this. The demographics, the age of the population, the average age of populations in different countries, cultural differences between whether, touching is a norm, or whether bowing, the greetings would include maybe bowing or actual hugging. Like different places seem to have just a lot of different factors that's not really clearly understood. Some places that scientists thought it would completely explode have not. Bangkok, for example, it hasn't. We thought it's a big metropolis; it's going to, there'll be a ton, and it really hasn't. And other places where they thought it wouldn't be an issue, like you said, in terms of climate, if you were to draw a conclusion from that, you could point at multiple places and say it would not be spreading here, and yet it is. So it's actually been presenting a lot of riddles.
Right, exactly. So it's going to be very interesting. We have another question from Joan, I believe it is. You guys have that? Yes. Can you discuss antibody testing? Because now that's the big thing, right? So if we can't stay quarantined until a vaccine comes out, what about antibody testing just to see if you have it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or had it.
Yeah, no, if it's absolutely, it's a crucial component to being able to move forward with real concrete information. Antibody testing. We need to know how many people, have you had it? You might have, right, Kathy?
I don't know. I don't know.
It's possible.
But if I had it, because here's the next question from that. If I had it, can I be reinfected by it, right? So that's the question, because, you have another coronavirus family, the cold, influenza, right? The flu. And as we all know, if you caught it last year, there's still a very high probability of catching it again, right? This year. So
sure.
I don't know if we know that.
Right. No. So back to the antibody testing, though, there are a ton of tests out there right now. I got an email from my primary physician this week telling me I could get tested. And it's $119, I believe, is what she said the test was. I was like, I think I'll wait. I was kind of expecting that because we really need this information, that it would be just something like encouraging everyone to come out and get tested. I wasn't really expecting there to be a price tag attached to it. But what we need to keep in mind is that right now it's still kind of early in the antibody testing, and turns out, as I mentioned last time I was here, that they are still proving to be problematic. It's still the wild, wild west of antibody testing. And what I mean by that is that a group of scientists gathered, it was actually, they produced their results on this past Friday, where they examined all of the antibody tests that are available on the market to do a very intensive validity testing on these and release them, because of this warp speed, this rush to market, some things are getting by. Like, how accurate is this, and how do we know it's accurate? And it turns out, of the 15 tests available, really they evaluated 14. Only a few actually worked and were actually accurate time after time. Most did not. Most yielded false positives. And that's a problem. And it wasn't that they were yielding false positives all the time. Maybe it was, some of them had like a 5% error rate, 10%. I think the one with the highest was 16% error rate. The problem with that is anybody who gets a false positive has this idea that now they've been exposed to it and they have immunity, when it could have been a false positive.
Right.
And that's not, that's not really acceptable. So I wouldn't be rushing out right away to get an antibody test. There are, I guess it was 3 that were very accurate. You can look those up, but a lot of them are still problematic. And then that leads to that second question. Let's say that you got a positive. Does it mean that you are immune? And that is literally the most, I would say, crucial question to guide, how we're moving forward. Is immunity developed with one infection? And if so, how long is that immunity conferred? Does it mean that you're immune for life? So, like you were talking about before, that herd immunity, it's really, the more people who have it, the safer we're all going to be at some point, the more people who have it and overcome it, right? Or is that immunity only last a few months or a couple of years or less? And we don't know. And that's the most frustrating part right now, is that is, for me anyway, I'm like, how it's that we don't know. There are hints, if you look at the other coronaviruses that we talked about before, the fact that there are 7 known coronaviruses that infect humans. 4 of them, probably everybody here tonight has had at least one or several of them, because they cause just a mild cold. And it turns out that you can get those again and again and again. Your body gets them, fights it off, but it's not a lasting immunity. You are still susceptible. So we need to all hope that that is not the case with SARS-CoV-2. And the idea behind that would suggest that it isn't the case, because it actually mounts, it actually causes such a stronger immune response in some people. So it would suggest that perhaps we are mounting a stronger response. The other part to that is we've seen, at least with the vaccine, there was a study released recently out of, I believe it was South Korea, showing that monkeys have been able at this point to develop a longer-term immunity in response to a vaccine in the lab. So they were able to re-expose them to the virus, and they are still immune. That's, I don't know how many weeks later, and I'm sure they'll continue to see how long is that immunity lasting for. With SARS, I think the immunity was like 3 years that they saw in terms of a natural immunity. So we don't know.
We don't really know. Yeah. And all of that will come in time, like it does with everything. I think the reason why, there's such a rush to know is because this particular virus, like none other, has completely taken over our lives. And it's threatening not just our physical health, but our financial well-being, our emotional well-being as well, right? Yeah, so I completely get why right now there is such a high degree of wanting to know what's going on. Listen, I have a really fun question to ask you that I find very comical, but I want to pose it to you. But before I do, let me just go back for a moment and just answer a couple of other just really quick questions. For herd immunity, I was reading that the goal is that 60 to 70% of people to contract the virus, that creates herd immunity.
That's correct. 60 to 70% of the people to have an immunity to the virus, whether that is from contracting it or from a vaccine or or combination thereof, but having somehow developed immunity to the virus. It is
right. Okay. Okay, sounds good. Also, because a common cold, for example, influenza, for example, it falls under the class of the coronavirus. If I took the flu shot, right? If I was vaccinated for the flu shot, could that give me a false positive for having COVID-19 antibodies?
That's a good question. That actually kind of addresses one of the follow-up questions that Joan had about the antibody testings regarding the sensitivity and specificity for the IgG antibodies. And that turns out, like, it does look like it is a problem in some of these tests. That might be the reason for some of the false positives, actually. How specific?
Also be a
what?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The test is only as valid as and specific as it has for basically the protein that it has been developed against. So you can imagine there's all these multiple coronavirus strains, right? 7 of them. So it's possible that there is some cross-reactivity. And that would be one of the explanations for the false positives.
On a separate note, hearing this, and it's something that I also read, hence the reason why I wanted to come back and be more specific on that question, because when we have Governor Wolf and some of the other governors saying that the requirement to open up our state is that we need to have confirmed and probable cases being less than 50 per 100,000 people. And again, is, like, our livelihoods are at stake. our well-being is at stake, not just financial, but our well-being as an individual. We're not meant to be contained, in one space. I mean, I think that's something, again, that's a question that should be posed and responded to when you have that probability, and that and that is the litmus test that's being used to determine if I can go back out and have a fighting chance at saving what I may have invested my life in.
Well, these are actually two different things. I don't want there to be confusion.
Okay, go ahead.
So the test that is being used to decide whether we can move from phase 1 to phase 2 is a diagnostic test.
Okay.
And that is very specific for SARS-CoV-2. It's not going to be cross-reactive. The test for the antibody testing is looking to see what your body has developed in response to the virus, to see if you've actually developed antibodies for that specific virus or not. And they're two very different things.
Okay, actually. So diagnostic testing is what? Like, what is?
So they're actually
some of the things included
for the actual RNA of the specific virus, a specific RNA sequence of the specific SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it's a portion that is actually specific to the novel virus and would not be confused with other forms of the coronavirus. So if you are positive for that, you do have SARS-CoV-2. Okay. My concern with the testing, sort of the policies that have been set up, the parameters are really, the more testing, the more positive cases you're going to have.
Naturally.
So we need to make sure, and I was a little bit encouraged because this was actually addressed in a recent press conference by Dr. Levine, that the same exact parameters would be used to decide who to test. So let me explain that for a minute. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you are getting tested, it's because you suspect that you have it, right?
Right.
So if we get to a point where you can just get tested because you want it, you have been around somebody who you think looks like they were sick, and you don't actually have symptoms, then we're going to really have many more tests, many more positives. We will never get down to the 50 new cases. It has to remain the same parameters of we're only testing the ones that are sick and have symptoms and think that they have it. And then we get down to 50 of those guys per 100,000 people. Okay, you can kind of make a case for that. But if you, and I haven't seen that well stated yet.
Fine, I know.
I mean, yeah, well defined, but that would be very problematic if we're just saying you have to get down to 50, new cases per 100,000 people, and you're just testing whoever, going about not stringently sticking to who you're going to be testing.
Exactly, right. So right, and we should be asking for that clarity, and understanding what exactly it is, because so much is riding on that 50 per 100,000, right? Even if that is the real target. Okay, this is something I must ask you, because I'm putting this under the banner of mask etiquette. I just read, I think it was this past Thursday or Friday, that there is some people are now beginning to have conversations about the harm of carbon dioxide, increased intake of carbon dioxide because we're wearing the mask. And I was reading that like, what? And then I thought, I have seen people literally driving in their car all by themselves with their window rolled up wearing a mask. This weekend, we went just for a long drive, and in a part of the state that is very rural, not a lot of people. And I saw a lady riding her lawnmower with the mask on. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if you need that right now. I don't know if people understand mask etiquette. So can you help us, give us some tips on when we should be wearing these? Yesterday, I saw someone jogging with the mask on, and he was by himself.
Right.
Help us.
Yeah, no. Well, so to be fair, for the lawnmower lady, it might be that she has allergies and she's just trying to keep some.
I don't know. I don't know.
But for driving around in your car with your windows closed, that's just, yeah, no. I've seen that myself as well, and I have no idea what they're thinking. That's not a good idea. You're already in an enclosed place if you have your windows rolled up, and now you're putting a mask on top of that. First of all, there's no threat unless you're driving around with somebody that you're not quarantined with, which you shouldn't be doing. And you are, like you said, that whole carbon dioxide concept. I searched for that, and I don't know. I didn't find much for that.
I did. I saw it. Someone put a link out there, and I just perused it. I'm like, really? And it was on Facebook, and people were really commenting on it. So there was some interest. Sure. I'm just saying.
If you're wearing a mask that has like no breathability to it, and you're wearing it for very long periods of time and not taking breaks, then I suppose, yes, absolutely, that would be an issue. But both of those things, to address that, one, you really want to be wearing a mask when you're in an enclosed place with other people that you're not quarantined. So we're talking typically the grocery store would be the one place that I go to where I reliably wear a mask. And then only for that time that you're in there. It's not something you should be wearing for a long period.
And wearing a mask is not like it's one of those things that you forget you have it on, or at least not in my case, because it's not very comfortable. So I'm like, he's driving around all by himself in his car, windows rolled up. I don't get it. I don't get that at all.
Yeah, no, I don't get that at all either. And I see it. I know what you're talking about. In terms of the running, that's kind of an interesting one. I personally would never do it, because if I'm out for a run, I'm going to make sure if I'm going in a place where I'm not expecting to be around a lot of people, and if I see someone coming, I'm going to give them a wide, a large amount of space. But if you are around a lot of people and they're running and you can't get away from them, I could kind of see somebody making a case for that, to have a mask on. My big concern there would be that if you're running next to somebody, they're coming at you and they're expelling air, with a lot of force, and you're worried that they're going to be exposed to virus, well, your eyes are going to be vulnerable at that point as well. So you're going to have.
So now we should run with the mask and our eyes closed.
Right, exactly. Close your eyes. So
just hold your breath. With your eyes closed. I don't know.
Just hold your breath.
What about your nose? What about your nose? They can go into your nose. So again, I think, right? So let's say I'm out running. I close my eyes. I hold my breath. But now, what about my nose, right? So who knows? What I'm saying is, people, there are not going to be protocols for every single thing. And at some point, we have to take into consideration. I was just looking at, I think it was you who was talking about it last time, and I pulled it up. Leading causes of death in America: heart disease, over 600,000 people every year. Cancer, almost 600,000 people. Chronic lower respiratory diseases, which I think this is, right? 160,000 people. Stroke, 146,000 people. Diabetes, 83,000 people. And let me tell you, one life is one life too many, right? And especially if it is someone in my family, I would definitely feel like one life is one life too many to lose to this insidious beast. And I'm sure you feel the exact same way. And yet we have to have perspective and balance and recognize that there is a high degree of risk that we take every single day just to decide to get out of bed in the morning. And we have to be able to balance that. I heard someone say it's kind of like an elephant trying to get away from a cat, and he's, trying to get away, and then he falls off the cliff. I mean, we don't want, what is it the president always says? We don't want the cure to be worse than the disease, right? And so let's just take that into consideration. We have very few minutes. I wanted to get to this study that I saw by, I'm going to butcher his name. I'm so sorry. But John, I'm gonna just say Dr. John, and he is professor of medicine and professor of epidemiology and population health, as well as professor by courtesy of biomedical data science at Stanford University School of Medicine. He's a professor by courtesy of statistics at Stanford University School of Humanities and Sciences, and co-director of the Meta Research Innovation Center at Stanford. I say all of that because now I'm about to read what it is that he said. He said, now, and this caught my attention because of what you talked about in part one, Anita, when you talked to us about, trying to understand COVID-19 and the fact that at that time we had both the Diamond Princess and cruise ship, and we had the Roosevelt Navy ship. And both of these were, you called it like a petri dish. If there was ever a petri dish of understanding what this virus is, how it contracts and how it impacts people, it would be there, right? Because they were quarantined in that environment, and every single person was tested. And so we learned a lot by looking at that. So this particular doctor from Stanford said, laying the Diamond Princess mortality rate onto the age structure of the US population, the death rate among people infected with COVID-19 would be 0.125%. But since this estimate is based on extremely thin data, because it's just those two examples, he said, let's add to that the possibility that some passengers were infected, that they might die later. Maybe they didn't die at that time, but maybe they would die later. So we will add that into it. And that tourists may have different frequencies of chronic diseases, meaning some people will get sicker faster than others or slower, right? He said, then the general population. So adding these extra sources of uncertainty, reasonable estimates for the case fatality ratio in the general U.S. population varies from a low range of 0.0005% up to the high range of 1%. So that's what he said, right? And now you and I were talking about this earlier. We have over 330 million people in America. So at the low range, that's 165,000 people. And at the high range, that's over 3 million people, right? I mean, horrible numbers, either way you look at it. But this is really taking into consideration that there are no stringent protocol, or that people can't learn and that people can't change. Do you want to add anything to that? What do you think about what he wrote?
No, I think it's important to consider, right? Like what is the absolute worst case scenario? And I think that's what he defined is what is the worst case scenario? And then how do we kind of, what have we learned along the way, like you said, and how to mitigate that. I don't know if he broke it down by ages. In terms
well, yes, he did it. He actually laid it on top, taking Diamond Princess and Roosevelt and laying it on top of the U.S. population. And this is taking into consideration that we do nothing. We don't social distance. We don't wear masks. We don't wash our hands. We don't clean things, right? And that this is what could happen. Again, it takes into consideration that with knowledge, with information, people can do better.
Right. Basically.
That we can do better. And now, what has been your finding from Sweden? Because Sweden did it very different from how we've done it.
Right. So Sweden did some interesting. They have decided to go ahead and kind of aim for herd immunity in a way. Now they did shut down schools for children ages 16 and older, and they did have some restrictions, quarantine for elderly populations. But everybody else was kind of allowed to just go about business as usual. And they have had spread. They have had, their fertility rate at this point right now is about double what America is. So it's about a 12%. But it seems like they're getting things under control. And one of the ways to look at what they've done is that many of the people there have had it, they've overcome it. And when there is likely to be a second wave of this, they will most likely fare better, not only economically because they never shut down their economy, but also just health-wise because they'll have a baseline, a lot more people who are already immune. It won't be able to spread as much. So they've taken an interesting approach to this. That whole concept of flattening the curve, some people thought that meant that it was going to be the same amount of people infected. It was just over a slower amount of time. But that's not actually the case. You end up having fewer people infected overall because you have people getting sick and getting better over a longer period of time. And it's just natural that the virus has less opportunities to spread because there's the odds of there being more people immune in a different environment at the grocery store now. It starts to, as the further time passes, the more likely that that's going to happen. So Sweden decided to just kind of let that happen a little faster among people who are less at risk. And now it turns out that unfortunately, their death.
Oh, looks like we may have lost Dr. Anita. I think we may have lost Dr. Anita. Listen, guys, we're at the close of our day, of our time anyway. But listen, this has been such an amazing conversation with Dr. Anita because, again, I believe the greatest threat to fear is knowledge. Once you know better, you have the opportunity to do better. I hope you guys like this. I really enjoyed it. I appreciated all of your questions. If you have further questions or if you would like to have Dr. Anita back on, please go to questions@KathyBarnettForCongress.com. questions@KathyBarnettForCongress.com. And also, we are in this fight. My team and I, we are working morning, noon, and night every day, trying to position ourselves to take our nation back. Just this week, the incumbent that I'm running against decided she is standing with Biden. In fact, she posted a picture of her and Biden on Facebook saying, "I'm riding with Biden." She hosted a town hall with him along with 4 other progressive women. And these particular women, my particular incumbent, Representative Madeline Dean, she won in 2018 on the wave of the Me Too movement, on the wave of gender inequality. And now that she has power, how has she used that power? She has used that power specifically to stand beside a man who is accused. I know all of you guys are aware of the "just believe the woman" mantra, right? That we saw during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. Well, it suddenly doesn't apply any longer, right? When it's not political, when it is political suicide, right? But when they are looking for political aspirations, they duped a lot of us. And they had us to believe that they would fight for vulnerable women and that they would fight by standing on the side of some of the most vulnerables and to make sure that they hold powerful men feet to the fire. And yet that is not what she's doing. I'm intending to win and to replace that. And I need your help. I need you to go to KathyBarnettForCongress.com, KathyBarnettForCongress.com, and give. We cannot do this without you. Go there. Blessings. Thank you, guys. See you next Sunday. Bye-bye.